A prejudiced cop destroyed the Rock son's phone, thinking his authority could cover up any wrongdoing. But when the Rock showed up, the officer received a life-altering lesson that might have ended his career. What made this officer crumble before the power of justice and familial love? Stay tuned. This story will take you from one surprise to the next. Thank you for following along. If you enjoy heartwarming and powerful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the exciting ones to come. The story begins. The serene landscape of a picturesque suburban neighborhood unfolds on screen. The camera glides softly down a street where neighbors leisurely walk their pets, children ride their bikes with carefree joy, and birds sing an uninhibited melody. Amid this tranquil scene, a boy of about 14 years old sits quietly on a park bench. Well-groomed and neatly dressed, he's engrossed in the magical world inside his smartphone, seemingly oblivious to the idyllic surroundings. Everything appears perfect until the unexpected happens. A police car creeps slowly into the frame, the tires emitting a faint squeal against the asphalt, shattering the silence. Officer Carter, a seasoned cop with a heavy-set face etched by deep frowns, steps out. His every move exudes authority and purpose, casting an almost suffocating weight on the atmosphere. His sharp gaze locks onto the boy, brows furrowing deeper as his expression darkens. As if drawn by an unseen force, he strides forward. The crunch of his heavy boots on the grass is a prelude to the imposing shadow that envelopes the boy. The boy can no longer ignore him. Towering over him with a badge gleaming on his chest, Officer Carter radiates an intimidating aura. Officer Carter leans in, close, his lips pressed into a thin line. His voice, low but cutting, slices through the peaceful air. "What are you doing here, kid?" The harsh tone fractures the stillness, setting the stage for a confrontation that no one could have foreseen. This is a public space, not a hangout for troublemakers. "Do you even live around here?" The words were sharp as blades, dripping with baseless accusation. The boy looked up, his clear eyes meeting the officer's glare. His voice was calm but carried a tinge of unease. "I'm just waiting for my dad, sir." The polite tone, punctuated with "sir," reflected a respectful demeanor even under pressure. The boy's composure seemed only to further infuriate Officer Carter. "Hand over that phone." The officer barked, his hand shooting out like the sudden strike of a cobra. "Now." His voice brimmed with authority, allowing no room for defiance. In his mind, this seemingly harmless boy was a potential suspect, a threat to be subdued at all costs. The boy hesitated, a small but meaningful act of resistance, a testament to his dignity in the face of Officer Carter's aggression. His pause, though brief, carried a courage far beyond his years. "Why, sir?" His voice was tense, edged with indignation. "I haven't done anything wrong. I told you, I'm just waiting for my dad." The tension in the air thickened, but the boy refused to back down. His eyes flashed with determination, though his trembling voice betrayed the strain of standing his ground. Officer Carter's patience snapped. His voice rose sharply, cutting through the atmosphere like a whip. "Did I not make myself clear?" he roared. "Give it here." The fury in his tone was palpable, his cold expression now twisted with hostility. He stepped closer to the boy, fists clenched, jaw tight as though restraining an inner storm of rage. To Officer Carter, the boy's defiance was a direct insult, an affront to his authority that he could not tolerate. Finally, the boy reluctantly handed over his phone. His trembling hands revealed his anxiety, while his eyes betrayed helplessness as he watched the officer snatch the device with a contemptuous sneer. "What does a kid like you need such a fancy phone for?" The officer smirked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Bet you stole it." The baseless accusation landed like a blow to the boy's pride, painting him as a petty criminal without proof. "No, sir," the boy protested, his voice cracking with anger and hurt. "My dad bought it for me. It's mine." The boy's eyes blazed with determination as his voice rang out like a solemn oath, firmly rejecting Officer Carter's baseless assumptions. But his words seemed to crash against an unyielding wall of authority. The oppressive force of Officer Carter's dominance bore down on him like an iron vice. "Let me teach you a lesson." A sinister grin spread across Officer Carter's face. His eyes lit up with malicious satisfaction as he raised the phone high in the air. In a sudden, brutal motion, he smashed the phone onto the ground. The sharp sound of destruction rang out, deafening and final. The device shattered into countless glittering fragments that scattered across the pavement like shards of broken glass. The harsh, jarring noise of destruction left the boy frozen in shock. His mouth fell open, his eyes wide with disbelief, unable to process the scene before him. Meanwhile, Officer Carter's contemptuous voice cut through the silence like salt on an open wound. "There," he sneered, his tone dripping with scorn. "Let's see how you play your little games now." Each word dripped with arrogance, a display of unchecked cruelty. Smashing the phone wasn't just an act of intimidation. It was a demonstration of power, a cold reminder of the consequences of defiance. To him, destroying the boy's treasured gift from his father was merely a means to assert dominance. The boy stared at the shattered remnants of the phone. His expression shifted, the steely resolve on his face giving way to profound pain. His eyes, which moments before had burned with defiance, now glistened with tears threatening to fall. His lower lip quivered as he fought to contain the surge of emotions welling up inside him. The phone, a symbol of his father's love, was now reduced to a pile of jagged fragments scattered on the ground. The sight seemed to break something deep within him. It was as if the shards of the phone mirrored the cruel reality of senseless violence he had just experienced. The boy stood motionless, frozen in place. The crushing weight of the moment paralyzed him, leaving him unable to move or respond, caught in the grip of overwhelming despair. Passers-by began to gather, their eyes widening in horror as if witnessing a tragic accident. Yet when Officer Carter's cold, threatening gaze swept over them, a chill seemed to grip their hearts. Their mouths went dry, and their tongues felt tied by fear. The thought of intervening, of uttering even the slightest protest, was crushed by the looming dread of potential consequences. The scene became a living portrait of silence, broken only by the faint, heartbreaking sobs of the boy. Through his despair, the boy's trembling hands searched his backpack. His fingers, shaky from anger and shock, pulled out another phone. An older model with a cracked screen, starkly different from the expensive device just destroyed. With trembling fingers, he dialed a number. His voice, shaky and filled with emotion, still carried a spark of determination. "I'm calling my dad." Reaching out to a higher authority, even as Officer Carter's oppressive shadow loomed over him, was a testament to the boy's resilience. He was determined to seek justice, no matter the fear or pressure he faced. Officer Carter's smirk deepened, a twisted expression of mockery that seemed to crush any flicker of hope. His voice dripped with derision. "Go ahead, kid. What's your dad going to do? Huh? Sue me?" Every word felt like a dagger aimed at the boy's dignity. To Officer Carter, the idea of being held accountable for his actions was nothing more than a cruel joke. Just as Officer Carter's arrogance reached its peak, the powerful roar of an engine shattered the tense air. A sleek black SUV, polished to a mirror-like finish, rolled into view, cutting through the scene like a harbinger of justice. The vehicle's door swung open with a commanding force, as if heralding a seismic shift in the narrative. The world seemed to pause. All eyes turned to the black SUV, captivated by its presence. And then, stepping out, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson appeared. His towering frame cast a shadow over the entire scene, an embodiment of authority and justice. His eyes scanned the shattered remnants of the phone on the ground before locking onto Officer Carter. His face, carved in cold fury, betrayed the simmering rage beneath his calm exterior. In a heartbeat, he transformed from a grieving father into the personification of justice. His piercing gaze froze on Officer Carter, an unspoken storm of anger and resolve swirling within. What happened here? His voice, deep and steady, rumbled like distant thunder, a warning of the reckoning to come. The Rock's question seemed simple, but his tone was as sharp as a blade. making it impossible to dismiss. His cold, diamond-hard gaze stayed locked on Officer Carter, challenging him to justify his reprehensible actions. Officer Carter, who had always been so self-assured in his authority, now showed clear signs of unease under the Rock's commanding presence. "I was just teaching your son some respect," he began, his voice straining to maintain dominance, though a faint tremor betrayed him. He had a phone that was clearly beyond what he could afford. His explanation faltered, sounding hollow under the weight of the Rock's unrelenting stare. The fragile thread of the Rock's patience snapped. His voice thundered like a storm, cutting through the tense silence. "You did what?" Each word hit like a hammer, shattering the facade of confidence Officer Carter clung to. "You decided to destroy it?" His voice, now brimming with fury, grew louder as his eyes narrowed. They burned with a fiery rage, like molten lava about to erupt. He stepped closer, reducing the space between them to mere inches. His towering frame and palpable intensity pressed down on Officer Carter, whose composure visibly cracked. Desperate to regain control, Officer Carter straightened his stance in a futile attempt to appear unfazed. "I was doing my job," he said, his tone taut, laced with tension. "Kids like him," but his words faltered, suffocated by the fear and shame rising within him. It was clear he had grossly underestimated the force of the Rock's presence. The Rock's voice rose again, booming with righteous fury and unshakable authority. He cut him off, each word seething with controlled anger. "Kids like him?" he roared, his muscles taut with the energy of restrained rage. "You mean kids who are polite, respectful, and quietly sitting in a park? Or are you talking about kids with skin, like his?" The accusation landed like a thunderclap, striking at the core of Officer Carter's prejudice. The Rock's words were not just a rebuke. They were a call to account for the deep injustice laid bare before everyone present. Every syllable dripped with righteous indignation, exposing the officer's bias and leaving no room for excuses. The power of the moment weighed heavily on the crowd, as justice finally began to rise against oppression. Officer Carter's thin veneer of authority crumbled like hot butter sliced by a sharp blade. The naked truth of his racial prejudice was laid bare, sending ripples of shock through the onlookers. The atmosphere grew heavier as the crowd absorbed the gravity of the situation. Scrambling to regain control, Officer Carter stammered through a disjointed attempt at justification. His words faltered, tumbling over themselves in a desperate bid to rewrite the narrative. But his every syllable only amplified the vulnerability in his position. The Rock, sensing the officer's growing desperation, took a decisive step forward. His massive frame loomed closer, encroaching on Carter's personal space, forcing him to retreat both physically and verbally. The crowd, overwhelmed by the Rock's commanding presence, fell utterly silent. All eyes were riveted on the unfolding drama, the tension in the air palpable. The Rock turned to his son, his voice softening with paternal concern. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his eyes filled with worry as they took in his son's shaken state. The boy nodded slightly, his lips pressed tightly together to stifle a quiver. His face, a mixture of shock and confusion, heightened the emotional weight of the scene. This brief exchange, tender and unguarded, stood as a poignant reminder of the unbreakable bond between father and son, a love that stood resilient against any challenge. The Rock shifted his gaze back to Officer Carter. When he spoke again, his voice was razor-sharp, laced with an icy menace. "You think you can bully a kid and get away with it?" he roared, each word reverberating through the still air, charged with uncontainable fury. "Let me show you what happens when you mess with the wrong family." His words, delivered with chilling precision, struck like a seasoned warrior's final warning, a prelude to the reckoning Carter was about to face. In a deliberate and weighty motion, the Rock bent down and picked up a shard of his son's broken phone. Holding it up like a trophy of disgrace, he fixed his steely gaze on Officer Carter. "You're going to pay for this," he declared, his voice carving through the tension like a chisel in stone. "Replace that phone, now." The demand was imbued with a kingly authority, an unmistakable command that carried an unspoken warning. The consequences of disobedience would be unforgettable. The scene stood still, electrified by the undeniable power of a father's wrath and the unyielding pursuit of justice. As the rock stood beside his son, his eyes shining with the pride of a devoted father, the essence of true strength became clear. Strength isn't about power or muscle, it's about the courage to stand up for what is right. This moment, filled with the bond of father and son and brimming with purpose, became a beacon of light in a world often shadowed by injustice. Though the story came to an end, its resonance lingered, echoing a timeless reminder. With courage, light will always find a way to dispel darkness. This tale reminds us all that fighting against injustice and protecting what is right is a responsibility we share. Have you ever stood up for someone or confronted an injustice? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice could inspire others and spark meaningful change. If this story resonated with you, don't hesitate to share it with friends and family. Together, we can spread the values of fairness, family love, and bravery. Thank you for following along to the end. Let's work together to build a better world where justice and humanity prevail above all else. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Stay healthy and happy. The stories shared here are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the aim of spreading positive values and have been rewritten with the help of AI. If there are any mistakes, we kindly ask for your understanding. Thank you for your support. Like, share, and subscribe for the latest updates. Wishing you all the best in life.